All right, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you all for coming. I am really excited to talk again here at Trailhead DX about Salesforce DX, which I assume most of you heard and learned about in the keynote. Hopefully you've gotten an opportunity to attend some of the other sessions that various colleagues and teammates of mine have had here at Trailhead DX. Today, I want to provide an introduction. So in the next 30 to 40 minutes, I will do my very best to provide you all with a good overview as to what it is Salesforce DX is, why it is that we've invested the last 2 years of our lives in doing this work, and hopefully leave you with enough information so that you can go off and take advantage of it yourself. So my name is Wade Wegner. I'm a VP of Product Management, focused on all things developer related. So my team and I work on the services that I hope many of you use, and I hope even more that many of you love. And we've also been working on, for the last couple of years, a lot of the capabilities that we are now including as part of Salesforce DX. So here's my information. I very much want to hear from you. I'm going to share some information at the end as well, but I want to call out that we have set up a Salesforce DX community in the success community where we can all interact and you can ask questions and share ideas. And so I encourage all of you to take a look at the success community and find the Salesforce DX group in it. We're going to talk about a few things here that are still in beta. So we just launched the open beta for Salesforce DX yesterday. You can use all this in production, but I do want to mention the forward-looking statement here in that please make sure that you're making your purchasing decisions based on the products that we have in market and sell today. And even though we'll be making some forward-looking statements in this talk, they're not that much forward-looking. They're going to be things that we're really focused on here in the beta and that hopefully all of you can try soon. So I'm going to start first by giving some background and talking about a journey that we've been on that started about 2 years ago. And it started with an effort to look at how developers were building software on our platform and learning from it. And from these investigations, conversations with probably many of you, whether you knew it or not, we actually stepped back and said, you know, if we were to define what the principles that we wanted our development experience to be founded on for Salesforce, what would they be? And then how could we apply this to Salesforce? And so hopefully you can read this. It gets a little washed out in the slide, but I'll walk through it real quick. And the first is that as a developer, we live in code and we live in source. And so we want to make the experience such that as you're building applications on the platform, everything that you do is oriented around that source. And in particular, many of us get used to this notion of the org being something special and in many ways being the container for our source and code. And so we wanted to shift that and say we can drive everything from source. And there's a lot of benefits that fall out from this pretty quickly that we're going to see hopefully throughout this talk. But that's a key thing. The source of truth for the app that you're building is the source that you have in your file system, the source that you're committing into the version control system that you work with. The next kind of falls out of that. The next principle is that these environments are easy to create and they're easy to dispose. They're ephemeral. And so much like when you're building apps with other languages, when you want to test it out, you spin up the runtime, you load your code in that app server, and you test it. We want to think about environments for Salesforce very much the same. And so how can we make these environments something that you can create very quickly and then effectively load with the source that you have alongside with it so that you can perfectly and every single time replicate the application that you're looking to build. And so this notion of ephemeral environments is also a very important principle as part of this process. The next is we wanted to make sure that you could use the tools that you want to use, that we weren't prescribing certain tools or certain processes. Instead, you could look to use the things that you've already used successfully and apply the knowledge that you have to being successful building on our platform as well. Of course, you saw in the main slide and you saw in the keynote, one of the key principles that we've kind of outlined all of our tasks around has been this notion of continuous delivery. How do we make it easier for you as developers to be building applications, making customizations, making changes, and getting these changes out to your customers as quickly as possible. And so being able to continually deliver and to be able to iterate on this and learn and to be able to improve these pieces of the application that you're building is a very key part of this. And of course, now if we shift down to the lower left here, collaborating as a team. How do we How do we make it easier for you when you're in a team of professional developers as well as a team with admins and low-code developers? How do all of you work well together in a way that leads towards your success? One of the things that we're introducing with Salesforce DX is this notion of modularity, and how do you think about breaking down all the customizations that you've traditionally had in your org that live all together? How do you start thinking about how you can modularize them and break them down into the related pieces so that you can start to build projects that accrue to your applications versus having everything in what we call, and you'll see here in a moment, what we call sometimes the happy soup, where everything lives in the org and there's no real notion of how that is related to the application that you're building. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we've done to make it easier for you to modularize your code so that, honestly, you have an easier time managing it over time, so that you have a code base that reflects the thing that you're building on. And that lends itself then very much to our next generation packaging technology, which many of you many of you probably use it if you're an ISV, you use managed packages, but we're very much focused on the next generation packaging technology as an easier way for you to distribute your changes over time and across environments. The way that you can take this modularized source code that you have, either in your version control system or on your file system, and package it up and make it easier for you to then install it into other environments for people to test as well as into production. And then as this thing evolves and changes over time, you can update that package with the changes that are reflected in your code. So none of this is new. We're not inventing anything new here, but what we've really tried to do is take concepts that, again, many of you are familiar with and have used in other platforms and make it so that you can apply these same concepts and principles to Salesforce as well. And so that is really kind of the basis and foundation for what Salesforce DX is it's a set of tools and practices that can help to facilitate working together more easily as a team, as well as being able to continuously deliver applications. Hopefully you're going to see, as we go through this, how some of the things that we've done have made this a lot easier. As I mentioned, it starts with your source. So we have an approach here that, again, we didn't invent this, but we've made it work really well, I think, with Salesforce, and that is a source-driven development approach, where you can work with your source, and the source of truth for the application that you're building is your source that is in your version control system, rather than the metadata that lives in a particular org that you have. By virtue of doing that, we make it easier for you to use things like version control systems and others to make it easier to work as a team. So many of you probably use tools like Git and different branching strategies with Git so that you can each do the feature development that you need to and then merge and work with other developers on your team. And so being able to apply that to Salesforce development as well. Continuous integration and delivery, we're going to talk a lot about the tools that we've built, in particular the command line interface, that really make it easy for you to start building this build automation that will test your applications via continuous integration, as well as create packages, and install packages, and deploy packages, and do all the things that you need to do to verify and validate the apps that you're building. And then one of the other kind of tenets that we've talked about is this notion of being open but prescriptive, meaning that with Salesforce DX, we want to give you the tools and we want to give you a process that you can follow to be successful. But we also know that you have many tools and processes that you've already used yourself. And so we want to remain flexible enough such that you can adapt our tools to those processes as well. So these are the key pieces. These are the things that we've really focused on that have fallen out of these core principles. And in many ways, these are the technologies that we've been building over the last 2 years to facilitate everything we just talked about. So source-driven development. One of the things that many of you probably do today is you work very closely with our metadata and tooling APIs. And you've built automation. Maybe you've ended up using metadata, the metadata API to retrieve source out of your org, and you put it into version control. And that works. And we've actually seen a lot of customers and partners be very successful at this. But there is a level of complexity as well as some challenges that we've seen throughout time. And so we've really focused on how do we make it better to express all metadata through an API, and how do we give you as developers better ways to synchronize source that you are making changes to locally into the orgs that you're building with and testing. And so this source-driven development approach is not just a better expression of source, but it's updated APIs to make it easier and faster for you to deploy it into the org so that you're not waiting a minute in queued behind a metadata deploy. It's changing the shape of the source so that as developers, it lends itself better to the work that you're doing. And as you commit it into version control, one minor change wouldn't be reflected in a file that's 10,000 lines long, but instead can be decomposed into smaller files. And so a lot of work has been done on this source to facilitate source-driven development. In terms of the ephemeral environments that we aspired to have, we've introduced a new org called a Scratch org. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's an environment that you can create very quickly. And when you create it, it's empty. And the only thing that you've done is you've configured the shape of that org. And I'll show you how you can do that. And once you've created it, you can then move the source that you're working on into that Scratch org. You can load sample data that you use for testing. And you can use that Scratch org not only as a place to test your application, but that Scratch org provides you then with the declarative tools that you've already started to use elsewhere. Things like the app builder, schema builder, the things that help you to work with the platform's metadata you can use in the Scratch org as part of that development process. And then when you're done doing your development, you can make sure that you've pulled out that source so that it's back into your file system, and then you can delete that Scratch org. And so over time, you don't have to worry about it. It's like, oh, I shouldn't have done that in that Scratch org. Now I've got to figure out how to back out those changes, or I got to figure out how to remove that. No, just delete the Scratch org, create a new one, and you can start over again. So it really facilitates that development process without encumbering you around this notion of an org and having to maintain that org as something special. We put a ton of time and love and investment into the Salesforce CLI, and so I hope all of you grab that, try it. One of the things that I want to highlight, because I've gotten a lot of questions here, is the CLI is a tool certainly that has been optimized for Salesforce DX and working with source-driven development and with Scratch orgs, but it's also a tool that you can use against production and sandbox environments as well. It's a very flexible tool. What we've done is we've taken a lot of the APIs and tools that you use that are kind of scattered throughout and you interact with different ways, and we've consolidated them into a CLI so that they're all in one place with a common way of interacting with it. And what's more, that CLI is not just a tool for developers as they're building applications, but it's the tool that you'll use when you need to automate things. When you, like, let's say you've got a Jenkins server and you want to automate certain deployments and builds. You can build shell scripts, you can build automation scripts using that CLI to automate a lot of those tasks. So we'll pretty much use the CLI throughout the entire talk. Of course, we've updated the Force.com IDE so that it takes advantage of a lot of these new capabilities. But one of the things that we've really focused on as a team is not just focused on building that IDE as one IDE that you can use, but we've really gotten back to this notion of we are a team building language services so that those language services can not only be used by the IDE we deliver as well as the CLI that we're building, but they can be used by other tooling vendors and tooling partners so that when they're building fantastic experiences in Sublime or in IntelliJ or some other IDE, well-known IDE, they can take advantage of these language services so they don't have to reproduce and figure out how to do all these difficult things like static analysis or code navigation or code completion, et cetera. The language services can provide it. And so we've really kind of gotten back to the notion of us providing these as developer services. Now, for continuous integration, one of the things that we did is we worked with a lot of different partners because we know you use a lot of different continuous integration services. Everything from Travis CI, which you'll find actually a fantastic Trailhead module focused on setting up continuous integration with Travis CI. From Travis CI to Atlassian's Bamboo to Jenkins to TeamCity and so Circle CI, et cetera. Like these are tools that all of you are using, and we wanted to make sure that Salesforce DX worked well with all of them. So we provided a lot of sample reference implementation throughout our Salesforce DX pilot. We worked with many of you that were setting these things up, and so our approach is really to facilitate and enable you to use the continuous integration process and service of your choice. Now, next door, colleagues of mine, Jeff and Dilip, right now are giving a talk on our next generation packaging technology, Packaging 2. So why you're all here listening to me instead of over there with them, I have no idea. But we're very excited about Packaging 2 because we know that everyone has different challenges at different points in terms of taking the changes that you've made and moving them into other environments. And so one of the things that we're doing is taking this notion of packaging, of providing a container for all the metadata and source you're building for your application, and saying that this is no longer just for ISVs that are publishing to the App Exchange, but this is also for enterprises and customers that are building applications and want to manage these things as a unit, and they want to version them over time, and they want to be able to create base packages of functionality that they're going to share across a bunch of other applications, and so on and so forth. And so we've taken a look at our packaging technology as a really key driver and way that you can distribute your changes in your applications on Salesforce. So Packaging 2 is an exciting capability that we're focused on. We actually announced yesterday the pilot, the open pilot for Packaging 2. So if you go to the various websites, and I've got some URLs here at the end of the deck, you can learn more, and would be great to have you actively involved in that pilot. Now, with everything we talked about, continuous delivery, we think and we hope and we've seen, kind of just falls out of that. As you get more agile, as you get set up CI, as you feel more confident in your ability to make changes to a discrete set of source and applications, you could find yourself being able to deliver faster and more often. And so there's a lot of great continuous delivery services out there that you can start to use in order to do that, including services that are available on Heroku. And then last but certainly not least, sandboxes are a key part of this. The value the sandbox brings is it lets you take the app you're building and test it in the context of everything else that's important and exists in your org. It's an environment where your end users have accounts, where your data is available, and where all the other metadata and source representing the customizations and the things that you've built in the platform exist so that you can verify that your applications build. So as you set up CI and CD, sandboxes are a part of that as you make changes and you accept them, being able to continuously promote and deliver these changes into environments like Sandbox and so forth before you move on to production. So before I get to demo, because I know I've been talking a long time already, and I much prefer to get to a demo, I want to spend just a quick moment talking about this notion of modularity with the source code base. Because for many folks, especially customers and various enterprises that have been working with Salesforce for a while, this is somewhat of a new concept, although many people end up practicing this as well. And so what we've got here on this pretty awesome slide, which I like a lot, is on the left, we've got this bucket that, think about it as kind of a logical container that's similar to your org today. And in there, you've got a bunch of changes you've made over time. You've got code that you've written, Apex code. You've got page layouts. You've got perm sets and profiles. You've got a lot of different stuff. And so this notion, and what we found successful in pilot as people started to learn about this and try it, is slowly looking at that and starting to break it out and to say, what I'm really building here is something that's related to each other. It's an application, and it's got this metadata, and with that metadata comes certain custom objects or some custom fields, and maybe some Apex code and some other things. And you start naturally pulling this out of that container and starting to organize it as a unit of work. And so this notion of organizing that happy soup into projects and packages is a key part of Salesforce DX, and really helps to facilitate that ability to continuously deliver, because instead of worrying about your entire code base and all the changes and all the customizations that you've made in your environment over the last 10 years, what you're concerned about and what you're working with is the stuff that's related to the application that you're building. All right, so I'm going to jump the demo, and I don't know if there's any way to set the timer so that I can keep track of things here, but that would be great if possible. But if not, we'll still figure it out. So what I want to do is actually first orient you in the CLI. So here I've got my command line interface, and we have, when you install the command line interface, what you're going to get is a binary, SFDX, and we've got a bunch of commands in it. We've got a bunch of capabilities. And folks that are looking at this may look at it and say, that looks kind of familiar. I'm a Heroku customer, and this looks a lot like the Heroku CLI, and you'd be exactly right. One of the things that we did is we partnered with Heroku, and this CLI is built on the same base, the same foundation as the Heroku CLI. So you'll see a lot of similarities, the way that it functions, the way that it works, and it actually works side by side very well with Heroku. So if you're building, especially if you're building hybrid applications where you've got applications living in Force.com, but maybe some services and some other things you use in Heroku, these two CLIs work very well together. And so I'm showing you kind of the top level look at some of the capabilities, and I mentioned we tried to really consolidate things that you've used and done today into one tool, and there's a lot in here. And again, it's not just related to the things that we've talked about specifically for Salesforce DX, but let's say you're working in a sandbox or a DE or some other org, you can use some of these commands like force apex to execute anonymous apex, or you could use force data to end up doing a SOCL query. So there's a lot of value built into this directly, but then there's also stuff that's very specific to Salesforce DX, and it is meant to enable you in this journey for building using these new capabilities. And what I'm going to start off by doing is actually showing you the capability of how you would create a new project. So let's pretend you're coming and you're getting started for the first time. One of the first things you want to do is do a project create and give it a name, and so we'll call this demo 1. And so what this does is it quickly scaffolds a project that you'll end up working in. And let me open this up and show you what's in here to try to level set a little bit. So we've got a number of files here, and let's start by looking at the Salesforce project JSON file, because this is a very important one. This is what we use to kind of set and orient ourselves to the application that we're building. Now, by default, what we do is we've got a couple of things. First, of course, the Salesforce login URL. You can always override that if you need to and you want to point somewhere else. The source API version, which can change, and you can target at different API versions. But then it's got this new thing that you're probably wondering, well, what's a package directory? And so remember I talked about this notion of code modularity and then the ability to accrue this towards our next generation packaging technology. And so by default, what we do is we scaffold a folder that we call force-app. You can rename this to be anything that you want. And then we set the path for the default package directory to that folder. Now, in some sample later on, I'll show you what it looks like when you have two package directories. And in the same project, we're actually building an application that will ultimately end up creating two different packages. And so this just sets the default for where your source lives. And so that as you're using the commands that you'll see later on, the commands know where to find your source and what source to work with. Now, another important JSON file we have here is the scratch org definition file. And one of the things that I mentioned that I think is pretty exciting about these scratch orgs is not only can you create them quickly and then get rid of them when you're done, but you can also shape it so that it has the features and the org preferences that you want turned on in that scratch org so that you can better reflect what your production environment looks like. So this is a very powerful capability. In particular, we think for our ISV partners, because think about it, you're building an application for the App Exchange, and then a bunch of customers install it into their orgs. As an ISV, you don't always know what that subscriber org has enabled. And so with scratch orgs, we give people the ability to create many of these config files. You could create 100 of these if you wanted to. And when you create a scratch org, you pass in the config file so that the scratch org has those things turned on. So from a continuous integration perspective and a testing perspective, this is fantastic because I don't want to personally go and test my application in 100 different orgs, but I have no problem writing a script that when I check in my code goes off and does that for me. So you can set up all these values. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of preferences that you can set. And the documentation does a great job of outlining all of them. So that kind of orients us in our application. Now, the first thing you'll do is, well, let me back up a little bit. Let me show you one other command here real quick too, and I'll clear this to get it to the top. So when you start looking at Salesforce DX, you're going to identify that there's two kind of fundamental things here. And I'm going to kick off the create command here real quick too, sorry. Go ahead and create a new scratch org. Now, in the context of a project, there's two things that you care about. The first is your dev hub. And we haven't talked about a dev hub here, so I'm going to spend a moment talking about it. A dev hub is the environment with which you'll end up creating all of the scratch orgs. So think about it as kind of a parent-child relationship. Scratch orgs, when you create them, they're orgs that you can interact with, but they have a relationship back to that dev hub. And really, it's just to track those orgs and to make sure that the person creating them has the permission to do them and so forth, as well as we do have some limits. So for instance, today, as part of beta, I believe we have a scratch org limit of 50 scratch orgs at a time for our production and paid environments. And then if you get the trial, you can get up to 40 scratch orgs at a time. So all of these are created in the context of the dev hub. And so like when you have your dev hub, you can look at some of the UI, and you'll see all the scratch orgs that have been created, what their state is, and so forth over time. Now, you might wonder, well, what is my dev hub? Is that another org that I need to create? Is that my developer edition org? What is it? And really what it is it's your production environment. So if you're a customer, your prod org, you can turn into your dev hub. If you go into setup and you search for dev hub, you're going to find a screen and a toggle, and you can say, hey, turn my org into a dev hub. And what that means is you can start then against your production environment using your production credentials to then create scratch orgs to do all your development. So it's very easy. If you're an ISV, you might be saying, well, I don't have a production org, I've got a business org. And so for ISVs, the business org becomes the dev hub. Now, at the same time, we know a lot of people will want to try this out before they turn it on in production. So we also provide trial orgs. So if you want to get this set up and try this out, you can get a trial org where you have pretty much the same entitlements. You can create up to 40 scratch orgs at a time that are active, and I think you can have 10 users in there. So there's a lot of information on dev hubs, but that is important because every command we run in the context of like creating scratch orgs will actually be executed against that dev hub. And then you saw that I just created a scratch org, and I passed in that config file. And so now if I if I take a look at the configuration for this project, you'll see that my dev hub is registered as my hub org. And then I've got a default username, which is my default scratch org that I'm working with in this project, and it is the scratch org that I just created. So now I've kind of got my environment set up, and I can do some development. Let me go ahead and show you a couple of other things here real quick, too. So one of the things that we've put into the typing and talking at the same time is always fun. So I use this -- help command all the time because I forget the commands. So you can start typing something, do -- help, and it'll tell you what it is. So I had already forgotten the command for creating a Lightning component. And so I wanted to show you is we have scaffolding in here so that as you're doing development, you can end up saying, I want to create a component, and I'm going to call it demo component, and I'm going to store it in my Force app in the Aura directory. So I'm going to go ahead, and what I'm doing here is scaffolding. So one of the things that we wanted to do with the CLI is actually provide the ability for you to scaffold a lot of different types of things: Apex code, Apex tests, Lightning components, Lightning events, Lightning apps. And so you'll find a lot of code scaffolding capabilities in there. Now, I've created that code. Let's go back here real quick. You'll see that it's created all the different pieces of the component that I need, and of course it's empty. I'm not going to put anything in here for the sake of this quick first demo. And so now I've got some source here local. And what I want to do is I want to take that source and I want to push it. I'm going to push it into the scratch org that I created. And so the semantics here are actually very similar to Git. So if you think about Git, you're doing adds, you're doing commits, and so forth. And so in many ways, you use the same sort of capabilities. You're going to be pushing source into your scratch org. And once it's there, I can now go ahead and test it. So let me go ahead and open up that scratch org. And one of the great things, as soon as you start using the CLI, I know you're going to love this, is when you interact with orgs, first of all, when you create a scratch org, notice how we didn't have to set a password. I don't even know what the password is for that scratch org, and that's because it created the username by default, so it created a unique name for me. I didn't have to worry about the username. And then it manages the access token and the refresh token. So when I run a command like open, or if I run a command like push, it's actually using the information that's been stored by the CLI. I don't need to know the password at all. It's all managed, and it won't even expire because we have the refresh token available and encrypted. It can new up an access token at any point. So it makes for a great experience interacting. And you'll find over time as you log into other orgs and you start aliasing them, you're going to use this all the time, and you're just going to be like, I don't need to know my password any longer. The CLI keeps track of it for me. What I wanted to show is that, as you'd expect, we created, sorry, I guess I created this time a Lightning component, not a Apex class. So one of the things that we can highlight is let's go ahead and create a new Lightning app and demo app. And go through all of this. And we'll create that. Go ahead and, instead, let me do this instead. I'm just going to go to App Builder instead and pull up that. So let's create a new page, new Flexi page, and we'll just demo. We'll create all kinds of things in this scratch org. This is the thing, even if you make mistakes with demos, you can just delete the scratch org when you're done. So one of the things I'm doing here is I'm just throwing some stuff. I forgot to actually update my Lightning component so that it was available to all Flexi pages, so you didn't see my Lightning component, but forgive me. So I'll just add something random here and activate it, because what I want to demonstrate is some of the abilities we have to take advantage of these tools that are in our orgs and create some things. So here you can see I'm creating a Flexi page. Maybe I come over here to Schema Builder and I create a custom class, et cetera. I'm making changes. I'm doing work in the Scratch org. And so now I've made some customizations, but those customizations live in the Scratch org. They don't live in my source code. And so one of the things that we've done is, and I'm not going to pull it right away because that would be too easy and that's what you're expecting. I want to show another command here, and that is force source status. So the powerful part of this is that locally, as you're making changes, you don't have to push all your source all the time. It's only going to push what's changed. Similarly, in the Scratch org, you notice that it knows what I've changed, meaning I made a bunch of changes and even made some mistakes. I did stuff I didn't even mean to, but it tracked the fact that I did that. And so when I do a status, it shows that these changes are available. That's powerful because what it means is you don't have to tell us what you've changed, which is the way that you have to do it today, right? When you construct the package.xml or when you're creating a change set, you have to specify what's in it. We know what's changed. So when I go ahead and do a SFDX force source pull, it's not going to pull everything. It's only going to pull what's changed. So these things really aid that development process. It makes it a lot easier. And we found and we think all of you will enjoy this as well. So that's kind of a quick example. Now, I wanted to show one other one as well because this application demonstrates a lot of things that I think are useful and important. So this is one of the sample apps we have up on GitHub. So it's on our main GitHub organization, and it's the Dreamhouse app. And it's the Dreamhouse app was an app created by a developer Evangelism last year for actually this conference, so for Trailhead DX last year. And what we did is we took the Force components and we put it into Salesforce DX. And there's a couple of things I want to highlight here that I think are important. First thing I want to note is the way that the source is structured. So remember we talked a little bit about code modularity. You'll see that I've got two different folders here. I've got a common folder and I've got a UI folder. And the goal here and the idea is that you can start to break these things out so that you start to organize. I've actually seen customers create test structures as well where they can put all their tests, their Lightning tests, their Apex tests, so that their tests end up now being separated, at least logically from the perspective of where the code lives, from everything else. And if we look at the project JSON file, you'll see that now I've got two package directories. And one specifies my common and one specifies my UI. And then today, the way that it works is, remember we did a source force pull. Well, you may be wondering, well, if I pull changes in a Scratch org, where are they going to go? Are they going to go into common or are they going to go into UI? And today, the way that we specify is we set one of them to be default, so that as I'm making changes and I'm using that Scratch org, it's going to actually, when I do a pull, it's going to pull that updated metadata and that updated source and put it into whichever package directory is specified. A couple other things. You'll notice I have a data folder here, and I've got some sample data. Now, one thing I want to highlight, I didn't mention this yesterday when I gave this presentation, and I got a lot of questions about it, is Scratch orgs don't have a copy of your data. They're not sandbox environments, and that's for a reason. We want this to be fast, flexible, agile, et cetera. But we also know that when you run your tests and you want to validate your scenarios that you want sample data in there. So we have two commands in the CLI that are pretty exciting. One is to be able to do an S-object tree import. So that is, here, actually, let me go ahead and kick this off. I meant to start this. So you can end up, let's first push our source. So we're going to do a source push for the Dreamhouse. And what we're going to do is we're going to do an import on that sample data. So that sample data lives as JSON, and you can import it into your Scratch org so that you have sample data that you can work with. It helps for testing and so on and so forth. The other command that we have that's pretty cool is you can go into any environment. It can be a production environment, and you can run a command called force data tree export, and then you can specify a sockle command. And what'll happen is whatever data is found in that sockle command will end up then generating the JSON files that you can then check into your app, into your repo, so that you can generate from a production environment or even a demo environment that you have. You can generate that data that you want to use and then just check it in. And of course, there's other data import capabilities in the CLI as well, so you can use those. Now, I just pushed a bunch of source. One of the things I need to do actually for this is do a perm set assignment so that my user, my sysadmin, actually has the access that it needs. So we're not just counting on profiles that automatically get generated in the UI. We're actually explicitly giving ourselves permission to these objects. And then what I'm going to do is do that data import. I'm going to do a tree import, and I'm going to import a plan, and I'll show you that in a moment. I'm going to import that sample data plan. This is going to suck all that sample data in. So that's in there. We'll take a look at it in a moment. The reason I wanted to highlight that plan is you'll see that the plan is actually a file that then references the other JSON files that actually have the data. So you can see it's pointing to our broker and property, and then each of these files actually has that data. So we've imported that. Before I jump in, I haven't shown any tests here, and I want to highlight the fact that the CLI is great for Apex test run. You'll see a lot of different capabilities for tests. One of the things that I'm going to do here is do a run, and I'm going to specify the result format as human. And what it's going to do is all the metadata that we pushed actually has some Apex tests. So this is going to execute those Apex tests. And since I'm running them interactively, I want to see it in a format that is a little more pleasing to my eyes. And you can see that it's returned it. Now, this is actually a good time to mention that one of the cool things about the CLI is, remember we talked about it being both for developer use, but is also for build automation. Every command in the CLI, you can annotate with a -- JSON, and it'll return the results actually as JSON. So that's really exciting, because then you can do some really cool things. Like if you're building a shell script, you can execute the CLI command, you can pipe it, and then use tools like JQ to end up parsing that JSON and extracting some of the details that you want that are in that response. And Thomas on our team is going to be giving a talk here pretty soon that I'll point you to in a moment, focused on some of those capabilities. Let me do a quick time check. So I think we're almost out of time, if not out of time. Let me go ahead and jump back here and highlight a few things. So you can get started by basically going into your production environment and turning on the Dev Hub. It's that easy. You can also get a trial org, so those details are right there. We've got a bunch of sessions. So a lot of the sessions were yesterday, but if you go into the event app and just use the word DX, you're going to see a whole bunch of information coming back. So definitely take a look at all of that. We've got 4 Trailhead modules and trails that you can use. I suggest you take a look at all of them. In fact, one of them was authored by GitHub. So for those of you that aren't as familiar with version control and want to get oriented, it's a really good module in that it'll slowly introduce you to things, and at the end, you're going to be doing all kinds of cool stuff with Git and GitHub. And these modules are very interactive. They will walk you through everything we did today and more. I don't know that we have a lot of time. So, awesome. Well, before I ask for Q&A, I just want to thank you all so much for coming out. I hope this was a good overview. I know it's a little compressed for time, but there's a lot of great sessions. Go talk to people, learn about it. I'll be around, Dave will be around, and if anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to stick around until they kick me out. So thank you very much. And if you do have any questions, Dave Carroll here has got a microphone, so you can feel free to go over to the microphone. Okay, yeah, absolutely. Go ahead. All right, well, if you have any questions, just come on up.